All right, today we've got Matt Lawson back, and we're going to be talking about 10 more NBA players and their dynasty outlook. And last time we went pretty guard heavy. I think Franz Wagner was the only non-guard, so I couldn't call it a guard episode, but I think I alluded to it just being kind of basically a guard episode. But today we are going to focus on the big men. We've got 10 bigs to talk about. And we're going to give our thoughts on them as players this upcoming season and how to value them in dynasty leagues. We're going to bring Matt on here in just a second and dive into it. All right. And we have Matt joining us now. And like I said, we have 10 players that we're going to be talking about today, giving their season-long outlook, their dynasty outlook, and it's going to be all big men. But before we get into talking about these guys, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Noah. I took a little bit of a trip down memory lane today, going back through Dynasty ADP that I had collected from past seasons. I was looking back 4 years ago. So this is August 2021. And I wanted to see, what did it look like, especially for our topic today, talking about some big men, because I had found previously that was the one area where dynasty managers seem to make the biggest mistakes, especially in startups, of overvaluing big men, even young big men in dynasty startups. Now, hold tight here, because let me give you, I think I've got about 10 names here. These are all big men who were top 100 dynasty startup picks. So top 100, you were making this as a pick that was going to be part of your dynasty core going forward. All right, all top 100. James Wiseman, Mitchell Robinson, Robert Williams, Christian Wood, Isaiah Stewart, Rashawn Holmes, Mo Bamba, Chris Boucher, Jonathan Isaac. All of those guys were top 100 dynasty startup picks 4 years ago. And not only would I say, obviously right now, none of those look great 4 years later, but even within that 4 years, you really didn't get a whole lot out of any of those guys from a top 100 production perspective. All of them were relatively young. I think Boucher was probably like in his late 20s at that time. But just about every, and Christian Wood was, like maybe mid to late. But you were basically in prime or before prime on all of those players, and really none of them have worked out to be starting NBA centers. So this is an area where we think we have an idea of what the future is going to look like. And I think it's a lot more perilous and filled with red flags and obstacles than we think. So I want to keep that in mind as we're talking today, that there's a history here of us putting a lot of value, startup value, into these players. These players are also traded for a lot of value too. They were highly valued in dynasty leagues, and they gave you almost nothing in the long run for different reasons. But some of those reasons are things that and patterns maybe that we're going to pick up as we're talking about some of these bigs today.
Yeah, I was just looking back really quickly because, having James Wiseman, I think that one makes a little bit of sense because he was the number 2 overall pick the summer before that. So just 1 year of rookie James Wiseman, the numbers were pretty good. But it's interesting that we had 3 to, I think, maybe 4 years, 3 or 4 years of Mo Bamba data, and he was still going top 100. It's just kind of crazy to look back and think about that. But hopefully we'll be able to analyze the bigs we're going to talk about today and the guys that maybe are subject to kind of fall in that category of, hey, we're going to look back in 4 years and be like, why in the world were we taking these guys so early? Hopefully we'll be able to deduce that a little bit here today. So we'll go ahead and start talking through this list, starting off with Onyeka Okongwu. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up, if you're watching this on the screen, a nice statistical comparison of Onyeka Okongwu and Kristaps Porzingis, courtesy of Data Baller, which has like a really nice platform to be able to pull up some advanced stats and comparison between two players right next to each other. So it's a really nice visual here to show that Kristaps Porzingis is a better player by a lot of metrics, and Okongwu is better by some. I would say overall, Kristaps Porzingis is a better player right now. But I think one question I have heading into this upcoming season is who's going to start at center, and how does the introduction of Kristaps Porzingis onto this team impact Onyeka Okongwu moving forward? I think, I want to get your thoughts on that, and then I'll share what I think as well.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting question. And so far, the only indications we've got are from some of the insiders, people in the know with the Hawks, because the Hawks haven't shown their hand here. Zach Lowe, who definitely has sources within the Atlanta Hawks and always speaks, when he speaks on something, he usually kind of knows when he's making a projection. And he continues to say, and I think I've heard him say it on multiple occasions, that he projects Onyeka Okongwu to start for the Atlanta Hawks. And I'm guessing that's coming from an informed perspective, because he said that after they traded for Porzingis, that he still expects Okongwu to start. And Brad Rowland with Locked On Hawks, he was on Dunked On this week, and I think he said that it was a toss-up. And I think that's where most people kind of land with it. He's not really sure, but he hasn't spoken to everybody internally at the Hawks to be able to confirm which way they're leaning. But he did point out that Quinn Snyder is really strong on kind of sticking players into roles and keeping them there and not really having it deviate based on matchup. Obviously, there was a lot of confidence by the end of last season in starting Okongwu at center. It's part of why they moved on from Clint Capella. But you could see potentially Porzingis starting as well. I think regardless, you're going to get Okongwu playing big minutes, because I think there will be minutes where Porzingis and Okongwu can overlap in a double big lineup because of the defensive and offensive versatility of Okongwu and the ability for Porzingis to be able to stretch the floor and Okongwu to be able to stretch the floor. I think that just like you can see Bam Adebayo and Kel'el Ware play together for some of the same reasons, you could see those two playing some minutes together as well. I don't think that they'll start them together. I don't think that you're going to end up with like Jalen Johnson at small forward, Okongwu at power forward, Porzingis at center. I don't think that's going to function. Probably not going to be the best way to be able to construct lineups throughout the game, to be having those three players start together. But Basketball Monster, and I think that's entirely on the table. Hashtag basketball is much lower at 26. I would lean toward what Josh Lloyd has there. I think Okongwu is going to have a big minute season, regardless of whether if it's coming off of the bench. I do think he'll close in a lot of lineups. I think he'll have overlap with KP. And it's because Okongwu had a real leap to starter level performance last year. The shooting continues to develop. The passing improved substantially last season for Okongwu. That was one of the biggest points of development. But he also just got more physical and stronger on the interior. He maintains to continue to be one of the more defensively versatile, kind of forward center tweeners that we have in the league. An ability to be able to switch a little bit on the perimeter, to be able to guard up and down the lineup a little bit. I'm really on board with Okongwu maintaining a lot of what we saw at the end of last season. And for me, if there's doubt about him, there might be people who rostered him at the end of last season, fell in love with what they were getting, but are now terrified about Porzingis coming in. They might think that Okongwu is just going to be a backup who's not going to be playing big minutes anymore. Test that in your league. You want to be able to see if you can get Okongwu for a discount, because I think he's going to be able to continue to give you top 75 production this season with the opportunity to grow that if Porzingis is unavailable like he so often is.
Yeah, and I think that lack of availability is kind of the biggest question mark to me, or the biggest reason why I'm not souring on Onyeka Okongwu at all, both in a redraft and dynasty perspective. I think he was really good down the stretch of last season and has been pretty good in shorter stints throughout his career, and finally having him in that role, I think it's something that at least maybe this is more just me hoping it, but that the Hawks will commit to that, because I still think Okongwu is more of a long-term answer than Porzingis. I don't view Porzingis as, okay, he's here now, like he's definitely here for the next 4 to 5 years. Like that may or may not be the case, but I view Onyeka Okongwu as more of a guaranteed long-term piece than Porzingis. And then the lack of availability for Porzingis for really most of his career, but especially in recent years, it worries me. And if I'm in charge of the team and I'm wanting to, maximize this single season of, hey, no Jason Tatum, no Tyrese Halliburton, we have a legitimate chance to make a run in a very weak Eastern Conference. Let's make sure this Porzingis guy that we just traded for, and granted didn't give up too much to get, but let's make sure that he's healthy. Let's, bring him off the bench. Let's manage his minutes. Let's manage his games. Oh, he's dealing with something minor. Like, let's not force him to play through it, because frankly, the East is weaker this year. We don't necessarily need him playing every single game just to maybe get a 4 seed. We can afford a little bit of leeway to make sure that he's healthy. So I do see, maybe this, again, could just be what I would do versus what actually ends up happening, but I would start Okongwu, would play them together, because I do think that both of them, Porzingis is obviously a true stretch big, but Okongwu has improved enough as a shooter that could work very well in certain lineups. Playing them together for a few minutes per game allows both of them to play enough of a role. It could see Okongwu at like 30 minutes per game, Porzingis at like 25, 26. and he can be really effective for fantasy managers in that role. So, and then still long-term, still love what we've seen so far from Okongwu, and I still think there's a lot of room for him to grow. All right. We have another set of centers to talk about, specifically with Derek Lively, and then still kind of maybe less of a competition for the starting center spot with Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. Is that how you view this as well, as, hey, that Derek Lively is going to be the starting center? And then what is kind of the ceiling here for Derek Lively? Because I still think he's got plenty of room to grow.
Yeah, I think we're going to see Derek Lively start next to Anthony Davis in the front court in Dallas this year. Anthony Davis doesn't want to play center. They're not going to make Anthony Davis play center. And they actually have the luxury of being able to play Derek Lively and Anthony Davis together because of the defensive versatility that you get from Derek Lively, that he can kind of guard smaller players, and guard a little bit on the perimeter, as well as being an interior presence and a rim protector. And I think that Lively's breakout performance during the 2024 NBA playoffs, during the Mavs finals run, has already kind of faded in people's memories a little bit, because last year was snake bitten with injuries, and the Luka trade, and it just never really gelled completely for Lively in a second season, despite the fact that he played really well for stretches during it. He looks and has looked like kind of one of the NBA's next great defensive bigs. And offensively, he was the perfect pairing with Luka as a lob threat. But also last year, you saw the continued development that we started to see in the playoffs the previous year of his ability to be able to pass out of the short roll. There's a lot here that is still developing with Derek Lively, and I'm a full believer in him as a big minute starting center going forward. That assist rate jumped from 9th percentile in his rookie season to 59th percentile last season. That's almost unheard of. You never see players make that kind of leap, especially at the center position. And it suggests when a player can add something to their game that dramatically and make that large of a leap in a single season, that there's something really special there. This is something that we've talked about before with players like Anthony Edwards, where all of a sudden there's just some whole new element to their game that we didn't see before, and things are getting added on season by season. That's what the great players do. And I'm not saying necessarily that Derek Lively is going to be a great player, a Hall of Fame player, but there's flashes here of something that is more than just your kind of traditional big man, your traditional screen and roll big. I think that there's real potential for him to be able to make continued offensive leaps that could turn him into an all-star, all-NBA level of center going forward. I think he's going to thrive next to Cooper Flagg, as in the starting front court after this kind of Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving era ends in Dallas, which I think we're going to be in a couple years looking at exactly that. This is an elite rim finisher, 97th and 99th percentile finishing at the rim in his first 2 seasons. So don't get caught up in what's going on right now with this kind of clogged depth chart with Daniel Gafford and Anthony Davis. And, Lively's probably only going to be playing minutes in the mid-20s. That's short-term thinking. I think in Dynasty, this is your opportunity and kind of a last chance to be able to get a guy who I think across his prime is going to be a really big minute starting center who has a much higher ceiling than I think many people realize right now. And I'd be looking to buy. And the last thing about Lively is that I think there was kind of a narrative around him that he was a Luka merchant, that the only reason he was good was when Luka was on the court. And in 2024, that was true. As a rookie, he was way better with Luka on the court compared to when he was off. Last year, it was actually the exact opposite. He had the same numbers in his minutes without Luka on the court that he had with Luka on the court in his rookie season. So he was actually better without Luka in those minutes. Now, that's a smaller sample size, but it at least goes to show that his production is just not based solely on being set up by Luka Doncic. He disproved that last year. I think he'll continue to do that this season. And the thing we have to be concerned about is the injuries. And this is one of the reasons why some of those big men that we talked about from the 2021 Dynasty ADP, some of the guys that have fallen off since then, many guys in the NBA history who are 7-footers have fallen off and not lived up to their potential, is because of lower body injuries. That is a red flag. He had a stress fracture in his right ankle last season, and then he had surgery to remove bone spurs in his right foot this offseason. It sounds like he's going to be ready for training camp, but this is something to monitor. Is he healthy? Are we getting a productive, healthy season from Derek Lively? I would be looking to trade for him during this season, If he does show that he's able to stay on the court and the minutes are still suppressed a little bit, I think that's going to create a buying opportunity. But we definitely want to see that there aren't going to be recurrent issues with this right foot and ankle that are going to hold him back in his career, because that is one of those areas with big men where it can all fall apart. I am hopeful that that's not going to be the case with Lively, but it's something that we need to flag, because this is a guy who I think could be one of the best centers in the NBA in his prime, based on the trajectory we've seen in these first 2 seasons.
And yeah, and the upside's definitely there, but we could still get some very solid production from him just this upcoming season, even if the minutes are limited, because Anthony Davis isn't going to start at center or play much center, but they could still have some lineups with him at center. But obviously Lively and Gafford both being there, probably not too many. But Lively played 23 minutes per game last season, averaged 8.7 points, 7.5 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1.6 blocks, absurd field goal percentage. And 23 minutes is very realistic for this upcoming season. He was just outside the top 100 on Basketball Monster and 9 cap value. So you're just getting those traditional center stats, but he could still have and be a productive center this year. And then long term, the sky is like, or the ceiling is the sky. The sky's some sort of analogy there saying he has a really high ceiling. There we go. That's the words I'm trying to use. Moving on.
As Michael Jordan said, the ceiling is the roof.
I think that's the one I was thinking of, and I was like, wait a minute, that's the one that everyone like that just doesn't make sense. So I don't want to say that one, but I was like, what's the actual one I'm trying to say? Anyways, the next big that we can talk about is Zach Edey. And yeah, I think that there are some people that are very high on him in the Dynasty community. Shout out to Jason, who is absurdly high on Zach Edey. We'll see exactly how this works, but I am expecting him to be better in year 2 with what I assume is going to be an offensive system that is a little bit more tailored to pick and rolls with him and John Morant. How high are you on Zach Edey?
I'm pretty high on Zach Edey, and I think this is another player where, and this is going to become a recurrent theme in this, there's an opportunity to buy because of injury recovery. Edey, the breakout, if you blinked, you missed it, but it did happen right at the end of last season after Taylor Jenkins is fired. In April, after Jenkins is fired right at the end of March, we've got Edey playing across the end of the regular season, 2 play-in games and the playoffs. He's playing 30-plus minutes a night across 13 games, and he's averaging 15-plus rebounds. Everything, he's able to stay on the court defensively, and that's especially notable in those play-in games and the playoffs. This is the area where there was a lot of hand-wringing about, Zach Edey is just going to be the next Boban, yeah, he's huge and he's talented and he's got touch, but, he's just never going to be able to stay on the court. You're just going to be able to play him off, especially in the playoffs. Well, he disproved that. And he played big minutes against the Thunder. He was able to stay in against a team that really stretches you out with their spacing and makes things uncomfortable for other bigs. He was able to do that. And I think that was proof of concept that he can be a big minute starting center in this league. At the very least, I think he can play minutes in the high 20s. It might be able to get up into the low 30s eventually. The only real question for me with Zach Edey, it isn't the production. It isn't his ability to be able to stay on the court. Right now, it's the fact that between Summer League last year and this offseason, he had 4 ankle injuries on the same ankle. And eventually the Grizzlies, after he injured it again, sprained it again in the offseason, they said, we need to be able to get a procedure to be able to stabilize this ankle, because clearly it's not going to stop spraining itself every time you get on the basketball court. So he did have offseason surgery to be able to stabilize the ligaments in that left ankle. He's going to be out at the start of the season. I would not be surprised if he's missing games through October into November, and he might not be back until December. So this is going to create a real opportunity for you. The projection systems out there, Basketball Monsters got him at 53 games, and Hashtag's got him at 56. So that's missing the first chunk of the season. That's going to be an area where you're going to be able to acquire Edey at a discount. I think that people will get frustrated with the fact that he's not available. There's going to be some questions about it. I'm not overly concerned. I think that this was done as a precaution to be able to make sure that he does have the long-term future that the Grizzlies expect him to have. I don't think that they made significant investment in the center position that tells me that they are deeply concerned with this long term. They got rid of Jay Huff. They bring in Jock Landale, but there's not anything on this depth chart that tells me they aren't planning on having Zach Edey this season. And it makes me think that there's a good reason to invest in him, because if he does get the minutes and the role that he had at the end of last season, if he is allowed to play pick and roll with John Morant and set those big bone crushing screens like Steven Adams did for John Morant once back in the day, you're going to get the opportunity for Edey to be able to grow into a starting center who gives you a double-double most nights and is able to, get solid block numbers, doesn't hurt you from the free throw line. There's a lot to be able to like about him from a fantasy perspective. One of the best per minute fantasy players we've seen in a while coming out of Purdue. And now it looks like the minutes are going to be there, which was the real question. Can he do that? If he's healthy and available, he's going to have the minutes. He's going to have the role. He's going to have the per minute production. So it is wheels up for a big season for Zach Edey if he can just stay on the court.
Yes, and the health will be a major question mark for Zach Edey, just based on what we saw during his rookie year and back even to Summer League. Talking about a different Memphis Grizzlies big now, we can continue the conversation kind of to see exactly how this is going to work with Jaren Jackson Jr. And it'll be interesting to see how those two fit together for a whole season this upcoming year. Do we think that maybe Jaren Jackson Jr.'s blocks are impacted by having Zach Edey back there? But I think maybe the bigger question to me is, how does the departure of Desmond Bane impact a guy like Jaren Jackson? Does he see his offensive role just increase and we see a career high for points for him? And does that impact his blocks in the sense that I think we saw this when John Morant was out for most of, I guess, the previous season, was his blocks went down because he couldn't afford to get into any sort of foul trouble. Does that change this year? Do we see his blocks go down? Do we see his blocks go up? What's your outlook for Jaren Jackson Jr.?
I think Jaren Jackson Jr. In the season that he had last year kind of showed us what his prime is going to look like. He's going to be turning 26 years old next month. I think that we got a good look of what the prime of Jaren Jackson Jr. is, which is a little bit surprising because he developed last year into a legitimate shot creator from the power forward position. His drive numbers were, sky high. And we saw the beginnings of this in the Grizzlies' cursed 23-24 season, where Jackson Jr. was really the only regular who was available during stretches. They gave him the ball. They let him do whatever he wanted to with it. It was ugly at times, but last season it bore fruit, and he became a legitimate on-ball creator. He created over 550 shots off of drives last season, which is an absurd number compared to what he was doing earlier in his career. In one of his most efficient three-point shooting seasons, even though I'd always like to see the volume come up, and maybe that is an area where we'll see him grow with Desmond Bane gone, that we'll see more three-point shooting from Jaren Jackson this season. And he remains one of the best defensive players in the league. The issue is he's never going to rebound as much as people want him to. The blocks I don't think are going to go back to what they were in the 2022-23 season. But he's going to be a top 30, top 40 fantasy producer across the next few 4, 5, 6 seasons in his prime. He doesn't really hurt you anywhere in his stat set. So I think that too often, especially when players kind of go against the archetype of what we expect from a power forward center, that we can get frustrated, like, well, why am I not getting these stats? Well, guess what you are getting? You're getting all those blocks with a guy who's going to average probably like 23 or 24 points per game this season. That's pretty rare. You're getting a guy who isn't really hurting you in your free throw percentage and is giving you, at least solid rebound numbers while hitting a bunch of threes, scoring a bunch of points, giving you blocks that are going to be a big difference maker in that category every single week. So there's a lot of value in Jaren Jackson Jr., even if he isn't going to end up being kind of the prototypical big man, getting big rebounds. That's not going to be his game. But he's going to be a guy that you've seen across these last couple seasons who's going to be able to create at a level that most players who are this power forward center tweener type aren't able to do. And there might even be room for growth there as he gets more efficient with it. This was a big leap we saw from him last season. It's possible that he gets even more efficient from that he does end up topping out above 25 points per game in his career. That's the kind of level that is possible for him, especially if we get a stretch where John Morant is unavailable and the whole offense is going through Jaren again.
Yeah, and our partners at FanDuel currently have Jaren Jackson as the sixth favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year, behind Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren, Evan Mobley, Amen Thompson, Anthony Davis, and then he is sixth at plus 3,500 odds. And it may be difficult to do just one with Victor Wembanyama just being there, assuming he plays 65 games. He's probably a shoe-in to win the award for the next decade. But Jaren Jackson, I think if he's going to make a run for that, those blocks are going to have to get back up to where they were, which may be difficult for him to accomplish.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss not to mention here, because it's been a theme across almost all the players we've talked about so far, that Jaren Jackson Jr. did have an offseason turf toe injury that required surgery. He's going to maybe miss the start of the season, probably won't miss much time, but we don't know yet. And turf toe is a tricky injury that it takes a lot longer to recover from than you would imagine. If there's panic about that injury, I'd be buying him in Dynasty, but I would be worried about his games played number this year if the Grizzlies are cautious at the start of the season and they don't play him in October, maybe ease him back in November. I think that's entirely possible. We'll just have to see what his availability looks like in training camp and in the preseason.
100%. And moving on to the next big that we'll talk about, this is an interesting one because I think it kind of goes back to like a comparison thing of which center is the better option. And with Goga Bitadze in Orlando, what are your thoughts on him versus Wendell Carter Jr. as the starting center? Because when I was looking at some of these numbers, Goga Bitadze was definitely a more effective center last season. But Wendell Carter spaces the floor a little bit better. And if that's what they're going for, then maybe Wendell Carter is the better option. And I think that he is the more likely option as well. But how does that impact how we view Goga Bitadze?
Yeah, so I'm both absurdly high on Goga Bitadze long term in the NBA and extremely bearish on what it looks like for him this season with the Orlando Magic, because the Orlando Magic have made it clear they don't want to play Goga Bitadze and Wendell Carter and Goga. They don't want to play Goga Bitadze and Paolo Banchero together. When Paolo was out, we got an incredible December from Goga Bitadze. He's playing 29.1 minutes per game, 12.7 points, 11 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 64% field goal percentage, and the Magic had a 103 defensive rating with Bitadze on the court. He was a monster. And to me, he looks like the next kind of guy who lingers as a backup center, and then eventually the league finally recognizes and a team recognizes and gives him the opportunity to be a starting center, the way that we saw guys like Ivica Zubac kind of like linger in smaller roles and then emerge. The way we saw Isaiah Hartenstein kind of linger in a smaller role, bounce around between teams, and then eventually emerge as a starting center later on in their career. I think Goga is going to be the next guy to do that. All the impact metrics say that he is a guy who can play starting level center, especially defensively, but offensively. Without Paolo Banchero on the court last year, per 75 possessions, he averaged 15 points. It was only 8.1 points per 75 possessions with Paolo on the court. So whether that's a self-fulfilling prophecy or not, the production was not good when those two were on the court together. And that's why the Magic either decided they weren't going to play them together, or they just decided we're not going to do it. So therefore, Goga's going to have no role when he's out there on the court with Paolo, and it's going to be very limited minutes. And it was only 321 minutes with Paolo and Goga at all last season. 1,100 minutes of Goga were without Paolo on the court between Paolo's injury and minutes where Paolo was on the bench. That's when Goga played. And I think it's going to be the same this year. With Mo Wagner kind of slowly coming back from a torn ACL, Goga will get to be the primary backup center, I think, most nights for the Orlando Magic. There aren't really other strong options unless you're trying to have Jonathan Isaac play small ball center. So I think Goga will have that role. It will be in the non-Paolo minutes. I don't think he's going to have an opportunity to start, but this is a guy who still has a couple years left on a very reasonable contract. I think the Orlando Magic, who are a little bit getting tight against the tax, are going to be looking to be able to make moves. They're probably just going to get rid of Jet Howard, but there might be some team who's looking, if Mo Wagner is back and healthy and being the backup center for the Orlando Magic by the time the trade deadline rolls around, a smart team might come in and try to grab Goga, get that opportunity to be able to have him on a cheap contract the next couple seasons and see what is there for him in a bigger minute role. And if that happens, I think that this could be one of the biggest explosions that you could have in Dynasty, one of the bigger breakouts, because we already saw the proof of concept of it in December of last year when Goga was putting up top 75, top 50-ish numbers for stretches when he had that big starting role.
Yeah, he had an incredible stretch last season. Was definitely one of the more valuable players in redraft leagues early on. And if you want to get a closer look at what Goga Bitadze is doing right now, and you just want to watch basketball in general, he's playing in Eurobasket. He played a little bit earlier before we recorded this as Georgia beat Spain. He had 15 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He hit 2 threes. So maybe that's something that'll carry you because he was not an effective floor spacer last year, but he hit 2 threes in a Eurobasket game. So maybe it's going to be something that he introduced a little bit more this year. Obviously, it's a 1-game sample size in a very different league, but hey, maybe that's what's coming next. Moving on to another big man. This is less of a traditional big, more of a forward, but still, I guess, plays the 4, so I'm counting him. Keegan Murray in Sacramento. Things are not pretty in Sacramento right now, and I don't think they make a ton of sense to anyone. Don't make a ton of sense to me. Is Keegan Murray, is there any path for him to be an effective fantasy player this season? And long term, is it more that we're just going to kind of figure out, hey, he's a really good player. It's just not the best fit for fantasy basketball.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting with Keegan Murray because we've been on a little bit of a roller coaster ride with the narratives around him. So he comes out of Iowa after his freshman year. He's sitting behind National Player of the Year Luka Garza. Doesn't get a huge opportunity, but the per minute and the rate stats are fantastic. He then stretches those per minute stats out to a huge role in his sophomore season at Iowa. He already kind of came in as an older player, even as a freshman at Iowa, because he had played a prep school year because he was so under recruited. He decided to bet on himself, do a prep year, and then got some big D1 offers that he didn't have when he was first coming out of high school. So starts behind the 8 ball in that he's a 22-year-old rookie in the NBA. And I think a lot of people, their pre-draft evaluation on him was, well, he's old, so he can't be good in the NBA. And yeah, that's true that a lot of the older rookies drafted in the lottery in the history of the NBA draft, especially in the 21st century, that's been where a lot of the busts have been. But you need to look at the difference between guys who had multiple bites of the apple in college and were not good enough to have the NBA interested in them versus guys who at their first opportunity knocked it out of the park and got drafted in the lottery. And that's really what Murray was. He was a one and done in the sense that, yes, he was older, but in his first opportunity in big minutes, he was phenomenal. And that's why I had a lot of confidence in him as an NBA prospect. And I think what we've seen at the very least through his first 3 seasons is that Keegan Murray is here to stay as a starting NBA player, mostly because of his defense. He is one of the best defensive players that you might not know is a great defensive player, a really good wing defender. He's got enough strength and physicality to be able to guard stronger players, but he can also move his feet laterally well enough to be able to guard quicker players. It's an extremely valuable extremely valuable skill set that's going to allow him to be able to get, I think, a big second contract from the Sacramento Kings. That I would not be surprised if it gets signed before this season, because I think he is a long-term part of their core. I think he's one of the only long-term parts of their core that's on this current roster. And that's why I have optimism for Dynasty. Maybe not this season. And to be fair, Josh Lloyd, a basketball monster, projects Keegan Murray to have a number 98 per game fantasy season. He's going to play big minutes. We know that. 34 minutes per game is what hashtag and basketball monster both project. He's always available. They both project him for 76 and 77 games respectively. And the block rate has improved every season in his career. He got up to 72nd percentile last season, 97th percentile efficiency at the rim. Really the only missing piece for him offensively is 2 things. He needs to be able to knock down his threes consistently. He's been a little bit of a streaky 3-point shooter, really good from one corner last season, but not the other, which suggests bad luck more than anything else. And I think he's going to end up improving in that area. And here's kind of the big takeaway from last season. The De'Aaron Fox portion of the season was a disaster for Keegan Murray. He did not play well. He was not efficient offensively. His role was tiny. His usage was below 15%, but that usage crept up well over 16%, almost to 17% with Fox leaving. And his efficiency dramatically improved with Zach LaVine on the team as opposed to Fox, and just in minutes without Fox on the court, even when Fox was still on the team. So I think there's a future for Keegan Murray where he's a 20% usage player, kind of more of a normal usage for a big minute starter. I think that there's enough efficiency in his game that once he starts consistently knocking down threes, which I think he will, that he's going to be a guy who's able to get to the rim a little bit, kind of be a tertiary creator, maybe even a fourth guy offensively, but you're going to be able to get big minutes from him. He's going to be able to accumulate stats in those big minutes. So he's still a guy that I kind of like as a top 100-ish dynasty asset because I have so much faith in what the floor looks like because he's going to play big minutes. His defense is going to keep him on the floor. And I think there's enough in the fantasy stat set once he gets a more regular usage role that he's going to be a guy who I have as arrow up across his fantasy prime.
Yeah, I guess at least for this upcoming season, I'm a little bit concerned about that usage being what it was, even at the end of last season, with Dennis Schroeder now there and Zach LaVine there and DeMar DeRozan there and Domantas Sabonis there. Like, obviously, I think Sabonis is a high-level passer and LaVine and DeMar are fine. Schroeder's fine as a passer. But with Keegan Murray, I guess a lot of his shots coming off of passes from his teammates. I'm a little bit concerned about how many looks he gets or the types of looks he gets, but obviously he is a high-level defender. Hopefully we'll continue to see either around like a steal and a block per game, which is what he did, like just a touch under that last season, and the rebounding's fine. But I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit more pessimistic about things working out for him, though I do still see him as like a long-term high-level starter. Just maybe not quite as productive in fantasy basketball, specifically in category leagues. But moving on to back to talking about bigs with Yves Missi in New Orleans. How does this thing work? Because I think when we talked about it maybe shortly after the draft, trying to figure out how the center minutes are going to be spaced out between him and Derek Queen, like Yves Missi is a better defensive big, but the lack of spacing next to Zion doesn't work great. So the Derek Queen, who's not a floor spacer by any means, but I guess he's a better shooter than Yves Missi, which doesn't take much to do that. Maybe he fits better next to Zion offensively, but then still not great. And then defensively, that's an absolute mess. So how do we value more of a traditional big in Yves Missi with his current situation in New Orleans?
So Yves Missi started 67 out of the 73 games that he played in last season for the Pelicans, which was a little bit of a surprise considering that his pre-draft evaluation was that he was a really raw center prospect, super athletic, but both offensively and defensively was still kind of learning the game and learning how to process it. The Pelicans had nothing viable at center last year, and they just decided to let Missi develop on the court, which is fine, but I think it gave the false perception to people that Missi had a good rookie season because he accumulated rebounds and blocks. And it's an understatement to say that Missi was bad on defense last year. The impact metrics show it. He was pretty horrific, and he was completely unprepared, no fault of his own, to anchor an NBA defense. And the Pelicans defense suffered as a result of that, along with all the injuries that they went through last season. He was maybe even more raw offensively. He just has not developed the skill set to be able to do a lot of the things that an NBA center needs to do offensively or defensively at this point. But he is super athletic, and that makes him an interesting prospect long-term. I think that him being forced into way too large of a role last year, him being a really poor fit with Zion and really struggling in his minutes with Zion last year tells me that along with the additions of Kevon Looney, a really good defensive center who got, by most estimations, including my own, overpaid by the Pelicans to be able to come in and take him away from Golden State, and also the draft pick of Derek Queen, where they gave up significant draft capital in the 2026 NBA draft to be able to get Queen. That tells me that this new front office, who did not make the Yves Missi pick, who just saw him struggle in summer league, who just made all these other additions at the big position, I don't think we should have the confidence that projections right now have that Missi is likely to be the starter, that he's likely to play 24 to 27 minutes per game. I think that there should be significant caution that Missi might have a much smaller role this season, that they might let him play the role that he probably should have played last year, which is kind of being an energy backup big, learn the game, play a smaller role, try to use his athleticism out in transition and figure out how to play NBA defense, but maybe against lineups where it's not going to be as negatively impactful to have him out there. And I wouldn't be shocked, and I know like people aren't going to like to hear this, but I think Kevon Looney might end up starting for this team. He's actually a good defensive center, knows how to play NBA defense. He can function out on the court and at least be in the right spaces to be able to not clog things up as much for Zion Williamson, even if he is not a shooter himself. And these Pelicans have every reason to just try to win this year and put out their best lineup. They're not necessarily looking at this as a lost season because they have nothing to gain from a draft pick at the end of it. So I think they're going to try to put out the best players, and there's really no argument that Yves Missi is a better player right now than Kevon Looney. He's not. And I don't think anybody's really saying this or thinking about it, but the more that I've looked at it, the more I think, and it might not be a big minute role, but I could see Kevon Looney playing minutes in the low to mid 20s and starting and even potentially closing for the New Orleans Pelicans, and then mixing in some combination of Missi and Derek Queen for the rest of those minutes. But I think that there's real reason for pause here that Missi is going to see a significant decline in his role this season compared to last.
Yeah, that's not exactly, I don't think that's the best news for dynasty managers and not exactly what anyone wants to hear, but it's also, you make great points in saying like, yeah, we might not get to see a ton of Yves Missi the way we did last season. All right, another big to talk about is a big on the Brooklyn Nets, and that is Nick Claxton and our partners at FanDuel. You can currently bet on the Brooklyn Nets to win 20-plus regular season games. And they are at minus 148 to do that. So it's kind of up in the air whether or not they're going to win 20 games. You cannot bet on them to win 25 or more games. For your own safety, they are not allowing you to bet on the Brooklyn Nets to win 25 basketball games next year. That like the only other, it's them and the Jazz are the only teams that are kind of in that range, because you can't bet on the Thunder to win 25 games. Like they won't let you do that either. But as far as the teams that you can bet on to win 20 games, it's the Jazz, the Nets, the Wizards, and the Hornets. You can bet on the Wizards and Hornets to win 25 games. You can't bet on the Nets and Jazz. And I bring that point up to say, with Nick Claxton, is there any reason for optimism this season? Because my, I guess, evaluation of him as a big is, and I don't think this is like uncommon, but he's not creating much offense for himself. He's needing someone else to do that for him. He's a good defender, but this is not going to be a good defensive team. How many minutes is he going to get? Are they going to want to prioritize some of their younger, less established bigs? Like they just drafted Danny Wolf in the first round. They have Day'Ron Sharpe there still. They have Noah Clowney still. Players they have to figure out. Do they give Nick Claxton a ton of minutes to try and increase his trade value to move him? Or is it kind of like we may not see him play much this year, and he may struggle to be effective with a bunch of young rookie guards trying to figure out how this thing works in the NBA, because his best seasons were on competitive Nets teams. It was a Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant Nets team versus a very different team that we're going to see this year. So is Nick Claxton just going to kind of continue to be a product of his environment, and we should be kind of worried about the production we see from him this season?
Yeah, I think that with Nick Claxton, there have been two different versions of Nick Claxton that we've seen in recent years. There was the guy that you talked about on the Nets with Durant and Irving, who looked like a really exciting young prospect for a big because of his ability to be able to move laterally, because of his athleticism. Even some of the handling and passing flashes that we saw in his one season in college, there was reason to think that Nick Claxton had a lot of room to grow as an NBA player. And then there was last year when he came into the season with a back injury that he had sustained during the offseason. He said early in the season that he was going to have to manage it all season, had an epidural early in the season to be able to manage the pain from that back injury, looked like an absolute shell of himself. And to his credit, tried to play through it, did play through it for most of the season. He got his minutes ramped up after the All-Star break, playing around 28, 29 minutes a night. So you saw the minute load come back up late in the season last year, but he did not look like himself. He did not move the way that he moved. And his movement as a center is what made him special. It's what got him the contract that he has. But if he doesn't have that athleticism, if he isn't moving like he was earlier in his career, he's not going to be that level of player. This contract is going to be an albatross that's hung around the neck of the Brooklyn Nets going forward. Even though it's a declining contract, it's still way too high compared to his peers at the center position for how much he's getting going forward, making, in the mid 20s this season and having that decline to the lower 20 million figure. And then over the next 3 years, that's still way too much for what player he was last year. So I think this is going to be one of those big preseason checkpoints. It sounds like we've had a healthy offseason for Nick Claxton, and you should think that his back injury will be better this year, but back injuries are tricky in that way. They don't necessarily always get better, and there hasn't been a procedure that I've heard of to be able to say that Nick Claxton is suddenly, whatever underlying cause has been addressed, so he's not going to have this issue going forward, because honestly, if you do back surgery, it can sometimes be more risky than it's worth to be able to get in there, to be able to try to fix anything. So often they try rest first before they're going to actually go in and do anything. So it's entirely possible for that to get re-aggravated. It's entirely possible that it's not that much better, or it could be. We don't know. So this is going to be one of the big pieces of homework for us when the preseason gets started, when we start getting to hear from training camp. We want to hear that Nick Claxton is moving like the old Nick Claxton, that he looks like himself again. If we're not hearing that, if it doesn't seem like he is, if he's not available, if he's still kind of sluggish the way that he was last season, then we need to get out of here. We need to pull the ripcord on the Nick Claxton experience. I don't think, because it's very realistic that he's going to have a season where he's not that available, where his minutes aren't going to be at the level that they need to be for him to be a fantasy producer for us. And we know that there's going to be real risk that the Nets are going to be messing with lineups this season to be able to get as many lottery balls as possible, which they failed to do last year, and it ended up biting them. Jordi Fernandez is too good of a coach for them to be able to put real players out on the court. That's what we learned last season. They're going to they took some clubs out of the bag, and they're basically going to leave him only with primary on-ball creators who are rookies this season, and that should be enough. Just like with the Utah Jazz, if you just kind of only leave guys who are inexperienced handling the ball at all times, you're probably going to be bad regardless of who else is on the court with them. But it is going to hurt Nick Claxton because he is dependent on being fed. And if Yair Doman is not ready to be able to facilitate an NBA offense in his rookie season, if we're not seeing a big leap from Nolan Traore, Ben Saraf, if we're not getting Danny Wolf, center point guard minutes that are, looking like a revelation, which I don't think we might see any of those things this season. Nick Claxton's season could suffer even if his back is healthy. So a lot of questions, a lot of things that we still need to see. I'm more hesitant than I was early last season because it never really fully got better. And I have some concern that if Claxton's athleticism is compromised by this back injury, he's never going to be the player that he was prior to it.
Yeah, and just quickly pulling up his Yahoo ADP right now. It's around 111, 112. So that's probably a pretty fair range for redraft leagues, with us being higher on him in dynasty leagues because we still like the long-term output, assuming that the health will be fine going forward. The last two players I want to talk about are not players that I'm super excited about, but the first one here is Deandre Ayton, and legitimately, what is there is like a fresh start in Los Angeles? Is this a good thing? Are we going to see Deandre Ayton have a bounce back season? Because he was a pretty productive fantasy player for a few years in Phoenix, but not great the last couple of years, and is putting him in more of a competitive situation on a team that is going to be competing for a championship with Luka Doncic and LeBron James there to push him. Is that going to work really well? And JJ Redick there to push him as well, obviously. Are we going to see Ayton have a bounce back season? And how does this impact how we view him in dynasty leagues? Do we increase our value of him there long-term as well?
Yeah, I'm not falling for it again with DeAndre Ayton. I don't feel like I fully fell for it the first time, but I probably did to some degree because we all went through the experience of him on the Phoenix Suns where, kind of the rap on him early on was, does this guy really even like basketball? He had that famous quote, that the thing that he was most looking forward to in the NBA was his second contract. And that's exactly, he told you who he was. He told you that that's what he was going to do, and that's exactly what he did, because by the time that he forced the Suns to give him a max contract by getting Indiana to sign him to that max offer sheet, the Phoenix didn't want to give him the money because they knew who he was. They knew that they had to force him to try to play up to his potential, and he did in that 2021 NBA Finals run. We all watched it. That was the guy that they thought they were getting at number one. He was all over the court. He was moving at a level that you never see a guy with that kind of big center body moving around. He was functional as a rim protector. He was able to actually switch a little bit on the perimeter. It was everything that you wanted to be able to get from him. He was setting hard screens for the first time in his life and rolling hard to the rim. And all of that has disappeared since he got that max contract, and especially in these last couple of seasons in Portland. I don't think people realize, looking at the numbers, because there were stretches where he put up really big numbers. It was usually that Mickey Mouse March period where no one's really trying that hard and you can just kind of collect stats, because this guy is certainly talented. He can get a double-double at a moment's notice in any game if he wants to. That is never the question. The problem is you watch him play and you immediately understand that this is a guy who just doesn't really like to play as an NBA center. He will just settle for mid-range jump shots. He's good at them, but that's not what you want him to be doing in 2025 in the NBA. He will. That is the shot that he wants to be able to take. You want him to go set a big screen and roll to the rim, but he's not going to make contact on that screen. And then he's going to kind of take a lazy roll where he's not really going to be in position to be able to impact the play or have any kind of gravity or pressure on the rim at all. And yes, he will catch lobs if he's allowed to hang out in the dunker spot with no one near him and have the ball tossed up to him. He'll be able to collect that no matter how high it is, because he's supremely talented, but he doesn't want to get touched. The free throw rate tells the whole story. Deandre Ayton has one of the most hilariously low free throw rates of any center that you have seen in NBA history. For a guy his size, with his physical ability to be able to not draw fouls at all, it tells you he is allergic to contact. So I am highly skeptical that that is suddenly just going to change this year. The only reason for optimism is, guess what? It's not time for the second contract. It's time for the third contract. And he will want to get paid. And if his dream is that third contract, maybe we see 1 year of him trying again like he did in that run with the Phoenix Suns. Maybe we see that guy come back to be able to collect the bag. But I'm not betting on it, because he is so far distant from that player at this point after these last few seasons, and he is so allergic to any kind of physicality that I just cannot see him fully flipping that switch to be able to play functional NBA defense, to be as physical as you need to in the NBA, and to be able to cover the ground that you need to be able to cover the ground as an NBA center in 2025. I think it's going to end up being a disaster. He might end up putting good fantasy stats this year. That wouldn't surprise me at all. If he's going to have to play big minutes. Luka is going to be able to get him easy buckets. He's going to get rebounds. That's all going to be there, but I don't think he's going to be a good real-life NBA player. I don't think he's the long-term solution for the Los Angeles Lakers, and I don't think he's a long-term solution for your dynasty team.
Yeah, I think the need for a new contract was probably going to be my one reason for optimism, and the situation itself is optimal for him. So it kind of seems like a recipe for a bounce-back season, but yeah, it doesn't change how I view him long term. I think that if he does play well enough to get some sort of major contract, one, I don't know which team is going to give it to him. I think it would take a pretty monster year. And two, like, once he gets that, we saw what he did last time. It's like, is there reason for optimism that, hey, maybe now that he's gotten another big contract, maybe this time he'll take it really seriously and make it worth it for this team? Or does he not care? The last player that I want to talk about is a guy that I think had, from what I remember, and you have the ADP data, so maybe you're able to tell me this better than from just me going off my memory, but with Jeremy Sochan, like, I feel like his reputation around the draft or during his rookie year was that he was going to be a really good fantasy player one day, a really good category league player, like a well-rounded big. We saw the point Sochan experiment. I think that was last season, not the year before. I don't remember the season start running together, where they were putting the ball in his hands and seeing how he could create. And it's like, okay, like, that's great for his long-term development, because maybe he's not going to be a point guard, but having another guy that can handle the ball and pass and create for his teammates, that's a good thing. But now they have De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, Stephon Castle there. So it's like, do we need this like point Sochan thing? And where does he fit in with this team as like not a great shooter? They have Harrison Barnes. Like, is there still a reason to value Jeremy Sochan highly, or is he just kind of being put on the back burner in San Antonio?
Well, let's start out with the positive, because I like some elements of Jeremy Sochan's game, and I think he is going to be a long-term NBA player. Uh, really, really big improvement as a finisher last year. Was great in transition, finished at the rim at an elite rate. You love to see that from a front court player transitioning from their rookie season into their second season of being, and even in their third season, making that big leap of being able to finish at the rim. If that gives the indication that physically they're going to be able to hold up in the NBA. Evan Mobley did something very similar in his career, where rookie season wasn't that strong of a finisher. That second year saw a massive leap forward, and that was a really positive indicator for his long-term trajectory. Sochan also good defensive player, is able to guard multiple positions, is able to move his feet pretty well. He has the strength, I think, and will continue to develop more to be able to play a little bit on the interior. The problem is this: if you have Victor Wembanyama on your team, you cannot pair him with a front court mate who is going to be able to have the opposing center hidden on that player. You can hide your opposing center on Jeremy Sochan, and you don't have to put that center on Victor Wembanyama. And that destroys the advantage, the massive advantage that having Victor Wembanyama has on your team. You need to pair Victor with someone who can shoot, who's someone who cannot just have the center hidden on them, who can be able to create a mismatch against a center. That's not what you're going to get from Jeremy Sochan. And teams are not always honest about how they feel about their prospects on their team, their young players, but they are in a couple areas. They're honest when obviously they trade those players. They're honest if they give those players contract extensions and what those extensions look like, and they're honest with their subsequent draft picks. And I think the pick of Carter Bryant was a suggestion that the San Antonio Spurs understand that Jeremy Sochan is not going to be the long-term starting power forward next to Victor Wembanyama. Might be part of their rotation, and I think he will be. I think he will be this season. But I don't think they think, and you kind of saw it by Harrison Barnes starting so many games last year and then moving away from Sochan, that they would rather have shooting out on the court around Wembanyama than having someone with Jeremy Sochan's skill set out on the court with him. So I'm moving back off of my belief in Jeremy Sochan as a long-term starter. I at least don't think it's going to happen in San Antonio. And my expectation is they like Sochan. He's probably going to stick around, but he's going to be a guy who's going to be part of their rotation rather than a big part of their core going forward around Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, and I think for Sochan, the main thing that's been, I guess, interesting for me is the lack of defensive production, because his steal percentage and block percentage weren't fantastic in college, but they were much better than what we've seen in the NBA, where I think he's been around like 0.8 steals and half a block per game. So doesn't seem like that's going to ever translate into decent defensive production. He's not a strong shooter. So yeah, I mean, I'm still think he's a talented piece, good passer for a guy that's going to be at the forward position, but maybe not a great fantasy player as long as he's in San Antonio. Maybe he ends up on a team where they increase his role significantly and he fits them much better. But right now, not super optimistic about that. But that is 10 players, 10 bigs, 10 4s and 5s that we were able to talk about today, give you our outlook for this season and in Dynasty. Before I let you go, Matt, as always, thank you so much for hopping on to spread some knowledge. What do you have coming up that we can be on the lookout for?
Working on my next Dynasty rankings update. A lot of work going on in the background, to some of which you're hearing on these podcasts, and the last couple of them of digging in on these players and really getting ready to be able to kind of stake my claim on players. These ranking sets that I put out right before the season, I think, are usually my best work because I put the most work into them, and I feel like we have the most information and there's the most opportunity to be able to, kind of have guys way out ahead of consensus or way behind consensus because we get a little bit of groupthink at this point of the year. Everyone has kind of been looking at the same stats. They're all thinking about the same past season. The echo chamber gets running, and it's about looking beyond what everyone is repeating to be able to cut through some of that noise, find where the signal is, and think about things that have happened in the past. I've been doing this long enough to be able to spot some of the things, the traps that we fall in consistently year after year. That's why I go back and look at Who are the players that we were too high on in the past? Why were we too high on them? And what are teams telling us about their rotations, their players, their stars that maybe people aren't picking up on yet? That's the stuff that I'm putting into my next Dynasty ranking set. I'm expecting to be able to have that in the next week or so, and I'm looking forward to be able to get that out to everybody. And I'm really excited to be able to get real NBA basketball, real NBA training camp, getting some real NBA news going again. Hopefully we can finally get these restricted free agents signed, because that's been a big choking point for me. I've been trying to hold off because, what if Josh Giddey and Jonathan Kuminga get swapped, and then suddenly we've got a completely different situations for them. What if there's a sign and trade and, one of these guys ends up in Sacramento? These are the things that could impact this, not only this season, but Dynasty going forward. So we've all been kind of in a holding pattern, but it's time to get ready. I'm so excited that we got mock drafts going on Yahoo. If you want to be able to check out as well, I'll be putting out my rankings for this season, just for redraft leagues as well in the coming weeks. Check it all out at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. You can go check me out on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP. And you can get links to all my content, a lot of it free. Looking forward to continue doing this with you, Noah. It's been a true joy to talk with you each week on these podcasts, and I hope we can keep it going throughout the season.
Absolutely. Would love for that to happen. Definitely, if you're not already, give Matt a follow at NBA Dynasty ADP. We will include the link to his Patreon in the description for this episode. Matt will be back next week, and I think I will be back next week as well, not later on this week, but that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network and the Believe Network, and brought to you by FanDuel. And I will see you next time.